defended yourself and now you're defenseless. We're the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about getting your firearm back in the wake of having it confiscated by police after a self-defense or other firearms offense that you've been accused of. Stick around to the end for our pro tip on the best way to ensure you get that firearm back. And before we get started, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting the like button.
What we're talking about is, we see a lot of folks arrested following a self-defense incident, maybe a firearms-related crime or a carry crime. And it kind of starts from this basic premise that, especially when it comes to self-defense, self-defense is a justification to what would otherwise be criminal activity. Remember, it's illegal generally to point guns at people, shoot people, display firearms, in a threatening manner. But sometimes it's okay when we're saving our life, the life of a loved one or a friend. Now, where police look at it is they say, hey, look, here's, we got this crime that we're investigating, and you may ultimately be justified at the end of the day. But that firearm is going to be evidence of a crime, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, they can hold that firearm. Not only are they going to hold it because it is evidence until the case has been resolved, but let's say you're in a situation where you're not charged with an offense yet. They're just, they have you under investigation. They can hold that firearm for the entirety of the statute of limitations, which, here in Texas is years, and it's going to be years wherever you are throughout the country.
Yes, and there's, and keep in mind, there's a handful of crimes where there is no statute of limitations. In most states, there's no statute of limitations for murder, for example. So if that's what they were investigating. But we do have a few scenarios, and I kind of break them into, you almost always get your gun back. Sometimes you get your gun back, and then you almost never get your gun back. And so we're going to go through those three different categories. So the times that you almost always get your gun back is if you're acquitted by a jury, they find you not guilty. Or if the case is no billed or declined. Don't you see that in your practice?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No decline, by the way, which you don't hear about very often, but that is when a case is presented to a DA's office and the DA's office declines to prosecute you. They don't think it's even worthy of filing that initial charging paperwork or taking it to a grand jury. In those situations, it is highly likely you're going to get that firearm back. It's likely in some other situations too. These are sort of our sometimes situations. Sometimes you're going to get it back, upon dismissal of your case, right? Occasionally, you're placed on community supervision or you're placed on probation, particularly deferred probations, right?
Pretrial intervention or pretrial diversion. They have different names depending on what jurisdiction you're in.
Yeah, and that happens again sometimes, but a lot of times it's about the agreement that you and your attorney make with the state.
Yes, and then we come to that kind of last category, which is the where we see people almost never get their firearms back, and that's when it's a conviction. If you're found guilty by a jury, that's part of the record, that's part of the evidence. The state's not going to, they have no reason to, and they're not going to return your gun back. Another one is if it's an agreement. If you agree, hey, I'm going to let this gun go, well, then obviously you're not going to get it back. And the other is if you plead guilty and you agree to surrender. So convicted by a jury, if you plead guilty and agree to surrender, or just by agreement. So those are the scenarios where we see, you're never going to get your gun back most of the time.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because you're in a situation where you defended yourself and now you're defenseless. But, let's say that you agreed to give it up, but you're not convicted of a felony offense. Well, probably you can go purchase a new firearm as soon as you're ready, as soon as you have the funds. Nothing's stopping you from doing that. But there is, for a lot of people, this period of time where they are in need of a self-defense weapon and they do not have one.
Yeah. And the other thing I think is worth mentioning right there is, let's say you're under criminal investigation or you're charged with a crime. Maybe you don't meet one of these disqualifying to where maybe you'd still be eligible to purchase. But it might be a condition of your bond or a condition, of your supervision while you're awaiting trial. So make sure to speak to your attorney. But that brings us to our attorney pro tip of the day about how to increase the likelihood of you getting your firearm back following a self-defense incident. And I think it's pretty simple, don't you think, Em?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You have to tell your attorney that it's a priority because even in, when we've been in situations of negotiating, there are things called dismissal offers where sometimes you can say, look, my client acted in self-defense. We believe he would be justified by a jury, but essentially, you're just bargaining with time, right? Instead of getting all the way there years down the road, he's going to take an anger management class and you're going to dismiss this case, something to that effect.
Yep.
But a lot of times, and lots of attorneys don't realize how important your firearm is to you. they'll bargain that away. They'll say, hey, maybe he surrenders the firearm. And that's a really juicy bite that the state likes to take out of you in these situations. So you got to make sure your attorney knows that that is not on the table.
Yeah. And if if the gun's something that you don't value, then maybe that's easier than if it's a family heirloom. The most important thing is letting your attorney know that it's a priority.
I'm more likely to let go of my High Point than, my Desert Eagle, right? So, I mean, sure enough.
But we hope you enjoyed this content. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please question and comment below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.